Imagine spending 50 years without seeing the love of your life, carrying only memories of letters and promises that time could not erase. And then, one day, by chance, in a random cafe, you look into that person's eyes and realize that nothing has changed. Ricardo and Sofia meet again after half a century, separated by choices and circumstances, but united by a love that never died. Will fate give them a second chance? Between laughter, tears, and breathtaking moments, you will discover that true love is indestructible. Stay until the end, because the outcome of this story will shake your heart. It's not just about love, it's about everything that time can't erase. Santa Teresa, with its narrow, cobbled streets, looked like a place straight out of an old novel. The sun shone brightly on the white houses, and the sound of children playing echoed through the alleys. In the middle of the main square, Ricardo was sitting on a bench, watching passers-by with his hands folded behind his head, as if the world were a play performed just for him. What do you think is more difficult, solve an algebra problem or talk to a pretty girl? He asked Gabriel, his inseparable friend, who was next to him chewing a piece of bread. Definitely algebra. You can always come up with something to say to a girl, but you can't fool the math teacher. Ricardo laughed, shaking his head. If it were that simple, I would have already spoken to Sofia. Gabriel raised an eyebrow, curious. Sofia, the one who lives in the library carrying stacks of books. She looks dangerous, my friend. One stumble, and you're buried under a bunch of classical literature. Funny you should say that, replied Ricardo, because that's exactly how we met. It was true. Ricardo and Sofia had met weeks before, when she dropped a pile of books at the school entrance. He, trying to help, ended up getting in the way more than he solved. I didn't know you carried the entire library, he had said as he collected the books. It's an efficient method to keep nosy boys away, Sofia replied with a shy smile. But the conversation stayed in his mind for days. There was something about that girl that intrigued him. Time passed, and the two began to talk more often. Sofia, however, was reserved. Feelings that she was unable to express in person were translated into letters that she wrote carefully and left anonymously in Ricardo's notebooks. Under the sky of Santa Teresa, where the wind whispers, my heart finds you at every corner, said one of the letters in impeccable handwriting. Meanwhile, Ricardo, fascinated by the messages, discussed the mystery with Gabriel. Do you think it's Leticia? She's good at writing, isn't she? Gabriel burst into laughter. Ricardo, just because someone knows how to write doesn't mean they're in love with you. Maybe it's someone closer. Sofia, overhearing the conversation, had to suppress a sigh. Leticia? She thought, irritated. He never notices anything. Months passed, and the bond between Ricardo and Sofia deepened, even though he didn't suspect that the letters were from her. Until one day, in the schoolyard, while Sofia was reorganizing her backpack, an envelope slipped out. Ricardo caught it before she could react. Didn't you bring one of these for me today? He joked, holding the envelope. But Sofia's expression gave it all away. She tried to take it back, but Ricardo moved his hand away, intrigued. So, it was you? Sofia blushed deeply, speechless. Yes, he replied, his voice low. Sorry, I didn't know how else to say it. Ricardo looked at her for a moment and then smiled. You could have said it like that. He held her hand and guided her out of the courtyard. The journey back home was silent, but filled with an energy that they both understood without needing words. At the end of the street, Ricardo turned and kissed her softly, as if he knew that moment would be eternal. Time seemed to have frozen for Ricardo as he watched Sofia leave with her family. The Santa Teresa train station was crowded, but for him everything was silent except for the muffled sounds of his own emotions. You don't have to go. We can find a way to be together, he begged, holding Sofia's arm as she prepared to board. Ricardo, you know I have no choice. said Sophia with her eyes full of tears. "My mum thinks this is best for me. She doesn't even believe in love. How can I fight this?" "Then fight for us. I would fight for you," he replied, his voice breaking. But Sophia just shook her head, unable to say anything else. When the train started to move, Ricardo ran alongside it until he could no longer keep up. "Promise you will write," he shouted. Sophia nodded, but in her heart she knew she couldn't keep her promise. Her mother had been clear. "Love is a distraction, Sophia. Focus on the future, or you will end up like me." The move to Capital Verde brought a new scenario, but it did not erase Ricardo's memories. Sophia tried to adapt to her new life, but at night, alone in her room, she looked at the letters she had written to him and felt a growing emptiness. "Does he still think about me?" he asked himself. Meanwhile, in Santa Teresa, Ricardo was doing his best to move on. His friends tried to distract him, but nothing seemed to fill the void that Sophia had left. "You need to meet other people," Gabriel insisted. "Maybe Leticia is still available." Ricardo forced a smile. "It's not that simple, Gabriel. Sophia wasn't just a girl. She was different." Gabriel, not knowing how to respond, just patted him on the back. "Okay, but that doesn't mean you need to live like a monk." In the years that followed, both Ricardo and Sophia became involved with other people, but their relationships were marked by a feeling of incompleteness. Ricardo, in particular, often found himself comparing his girlfriends to Sophia. "Why don't you ever open up to me?" asked one of them during an argument. He didn't answer, but he knew the truth. None of them were Sophia. Sophia also faced challenges. Despite having gotten married, he discovered that the love he was looking for was still trapped in Santa Teresa. "You never seem to be fully here," her husband once said. "Maybe because part of me isn't," Sophia thought, but she never said it out loud. Although separated by time and distance, Ricardo and Sophia shared the same emptiness, the same unfinished love that continued to shape their lives. The cafe in Capital Verde was small but cozy, with rustic wooden tables and a display full of homemade sweets. Ricardo entered, taking off his hat to shake off the rainwater that was beginning to fall. He was taking a break between business meetings, looking for a moment of tranquility. When he looked at the line, he froze. A familiar figure stood before him, ordering a coffee. "Sophia," he said, almost in disbelief. His voice was low, as if he feared it was just his imagination. Sophia turned around slowly, her expression changing from surprise to a smile that mixed nostalgia and disbelief. "Ricardo, is that really you?" He laughed, still shocked. "I don't know. It depends. Would you still recognize me without my old hair?" She laughed, shaking her head. "The hair has changed, but the eyes remain the same." They sat at a table in the corner of the cafe, where the conversation began hesitantly, as if they both didn't want to rush the moment. "What have you been doing all these years?" asked Sophia, stirring her coffee with a spoon. "Working too much and thinking too little," replied Ricardo, smiling. "And you?" "Surviving, I guess. Life doesn't always follow the script we imagined." Ricardo leaned forward a little. "And what was your script?" She looked away, smiling sadly. "It doesn't matter anymore, does it? Time has a cruel way of changing everything." "Not everything," he said, looking directly at her. Sophia blushed slightly, but kept her gaze. The conversation flowed more easily after that. They spoke of lost jobs, families and dreams. They discovered that their paths had crossed countless times without them realizing it, like pieces of a puzzle waiting to fit together. "Did you go to that library on Central Street?" asked Ricardo, surprised. "I was. But I've never returned a book on time, if that makes you feel better," Sophia joked. "Ah, so it was you who was making me late," he replied with a smile. "I think we have some scores to settle." The reunion was full of emotion, but there was something more, a lightness, a touch of humor that made the moment seem even more special. When they left the cafe, the rain had stopped, but the storm inside them was just beginning to calm. Ricardo and Sofia decided not to waste any more time. They planned a trip through the countryside, a journey that felt like a nod to the dreams they had shared decades ago. The first stop was Parque das Flores, where lavender fields stretched to the horizon. "Do you think we can still walk here without being in pain tomorrow?" Sofia joked, observing the path ahead. "Well, if we stay, at least the scenery will be beautiful enough to justify it," replied Ricardo with a smile. They laughed, and the sound echoed across the field, bringing a sense of youth they had both forgotten. Conversations flowed easily, mixing memories and stories from the present. Sofia mentioned the book she never managed to return, and Ricardo confessed to having collected map drawings, dreaming of traveling the world. "And now we're here, traveling," he said, stopping to look at her. "It seems that certain dreams just wait for the right moment." Then they headed to Praça dos Encantos, where street musicians played soft melodies while tourists admired the ornamental fountains. Ricardo and Sofia sat on a nearby bench, watching the movement. "Remember when we said we were going to dance in the street one day?" he asked, with a mischievous gleam in his eyes. Sofia laughed. "If I remember correctly, you promised to dance flamenco. I'm still waiting." "Your wish is my command," he said, standing up and trying to imitate the precise movements of a flamenco dancer. The steps were clumsy, but Ricardo's enthusiasm was contagious. Sofia laughed until she was in tears. "You definitely have 2 left feet," she exclaimed. "2 left feet but 1 right heart," he replied, making an exaggerated bow. That night, during dinner at a local tavern, Ricardo became serious for a moment. He took something out of his pocket, a small ring he had bought on the way. "Sofia, I spent half my life without you. I don't want to spend what I have left like this. Will you agree to marry me?" Sofia was silent for a moment, emotional. Then with a smile he said, "Only if you promise never to try dancing flamenco again." "I promise," he replied, laughing as he slid the ring onto her finger. The wedding day arrived, and the small church of Santa Teresa was adorned with wildflowers and candles that cast a soft light across the stone walls. Children, grandchildren, and friends gathered, filling the space with smiles and murmurs of joy. Ricardo was at the altar, adjusting his suit, while his grandchildren whispered something about him being more nervous than in any business meeting. When Sofia entered, silence took over. She was wearing a simple white dress, but the way she walked made time seem to slow down. Ricardo smiled, the same smile she remembered from her youth. "You look stunning," he said as she approached. "And you're sweating," Sofia replied softly, eliciting a laugh from both of them. The ceremony was intimate and moving. When they exchanged vows, Ricardo made sure to include a touch of humor. "I promise never to lose a book you lend me again, and to try to learn to dance without destroying my own feet." Everyone laughed, but the sparkle in Sofia's eyes showed that the words carried much more than laughter. After the wedding, the celebration continued in the church gardens. Children ran between tables, while adults shared stories. One of Ricardo's friends raised a toast. Their story is proof that true love has no expiration date, and sometimes the wait is worth every second. Later, at the hotel, Ricardo and Sofia shared a moment of silence while watching the starry sky through the window. "Can you believe we finally did it?" she asked, laying her head on his shoulder. "Not only do I believe it, but I can't help but think about how much I would have missed if I hadn't met you in that cafe," replied Ricardo, gently kissing her forehead. That night, while they were lying side by side, Ricardo began to feel an unexpected discomfort. Sofia noticed his expression and asked, worried, "Is everything okay, my love?" "Just stay with me," he said, holding her hand. Sofia felt the weight of the moment, but remained by his side, reliving in her mind every memory they built together. "I love you, Sophia. I always loved you," he murmured, closing his eyes. Sophia held his hand until silence filled the room. Tears ran down her face, but along with the pain was a sense of peace. They had experienced what seemed impossible. At Ricardo's funeral, Sophia chose to recite an old poem, one of the ones she had written for him in her youth. "Under the sky of Santa Teresa, where the wind whispers, my heart finds you at every corner," she read, her voice breaking. Emotion took over everyone, but Sophia remained firm. Then, looking up at the sky, he whispered, "Until we meet again." She knew that the love they shared would transcend time and space, guiding her through the rest of her life.